Greetings, programs. Welcome to Rationality from AI to Zombies, Chapter 6, Burdensome Details. And we start with a quote. Merely corroborative detail, intended to give artistic verisimilitude to an otherwise bald and unconvincing narrative. Pooh-Bah in Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado. The conjunctive fallacy is when humans The conjunctive fallacy is when humans rate the probability P brackets AB higher than the probability P brackets B, even though it is a theorem that PAB is less than PB. For example, in one experiment in 1981, 68% of the subjects ranked it more likely that, quote, Reagan will provide federal support for unwed mothers and cut federal support to local governments, unquote, than Reagan will provide federal support for unwed mothers. A long series of cleverly designed experiments which weeded out alternative hypotheses and nailed down the standard interpretation confirmed that conjunction fallacy occurs because we, quote, substitute judgment of representativeness for judgment of probability, unquote. By adding extra details, you can make an outcome seem more characteristic of the process that generates it. You can make it sound more plausible that Reagan will support unwed mothers by adding the claim that Reagan will also that Reagan will also cut support to local governments. The implausibility of one claim is compensated by the plausibility of another. They average out. Which is to say, adding detail can make a scenario sound more plausible, even though the event necessarily becomes less probable. If so, then hypothetically speaking, we might find futurists spinning unconscionably plausible and detailed future histories, or find people swallowing huge packages of unsupported claims bundled with a few strong-sounding assertions at the center. If you are presented with a conjunction fallacy in a naked, direct comparison, then you may succeed on that particular problem by consciously correcting yourself. But this is only slapping a band-aid on the problem, not fixing it in general. In the 1982 experiment where professional forecasters assigned systematically higher probabilities to the scenario of Russia invades Poland followed by suspensions of diplomatic relations between the USA and USSR, than to suspension of diplomatic relations between the USA and USSR. Each experimental group was presented with only one proposition. What strategy could these forecasters have followed as a group that would have eliminated the conjunction fallacy when no individual knew directly about the comparison, when no individual even knew that the experiment was about the conjunction fallacy? How could they have done better on their probability judgments? Patching one gotcha as a special case doesn't fix the general problem. The gotcha is the symptom, not the disease. What could the forecasters have done to avoid the conjunction fallacy without seeing the direct comparison, or even knowing that anyone was going to test them on the conjunction fallacy? It seems to me that they would need to notice the word and. They would need to be wary of it, not just wary, but leap back from it, even without knowing that researchers were afterwards going to test them on the conjunction fallacy particularly. They would need to notice a conjunction of two entire details and be shocked by the audacity of anyone asking them to endorse such an insanely complicated prediction. And they would need to penalize the probability substantially, a factor of 4 at least, according to experimental details. It might also have helped the forecasters to think about possible reasons why the US and Soviet Union would suspend diplomatic relations. The scenario is not the US and Soviet Union suddenly suspend diplomatic relations for no reason, but the US and Soviet Union suspend diplomatic relations for any reason. And the subjects who rated Reagan will provide federal support for unwed mothers and cut federal support for local governments? Again, they would need to be shocked by the word and. Moreover, they would need to add absurdities, where the absurdity is the log probability, so that you can add it rather than averaging them. They would need to think Reagan might or might not cut support for local governments, one bit, but it seems very unlikely that he will support unwed mothers, 4 bits. Total absurdity, 5 bits. Or maybe Reagan won't support unwed mothers, 1 strike and it's out. The other proposition just makes it even worse. Similarly, consider the 6-sided die with 4 green faces and 2 red faces. The subjects had to bet on the sequence of 1. Red, green, red, red, red. 2. Green, red, green, red, 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 which is 1 more. Or 3. Green, red, 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 which is 6. Reboot. Or 3. Green, red, 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 appearing anywhere in 20 rolls of the dice. 65% of the subjects chose green, red, green, red, 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 which is strictly dominated by red, green, red, 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 since any sequence containing the first one also pays off for the second one. How could the subjects have done better? By noticing the inclusion? Perhaps, but that is only a band-aid. It does not fix the fundamental problem. By explicitly calculating the probabilities? Well, that would certainly fix the fundamental problem, but you can't always calculate an exact probability. The subjects lost heuristically by thinking, aha, sequence 2 has the highest proportion of green to red. I should bet on sequence 2. To win heuristically, the subjects would need to think, aha, sequence 1 is short. I should go with sequence 1. They would need to feel a stronger emotional impact from Occam's razor, feel every added detail as a burden, even a single roll of the dice. Once upon a time, I was speaking to someone who had been mesmerized by an incautious futurist, one who adds on lots of details that sound neat. I was trying to explain why I was not likewise memorized by these amazing, incredible theories. So I explained about the conjunction fallacy, specifically the suspending relations plus or minus invading Poland experiment. And he said, okay, but what does that have to do with... And then I said, it is more probable that universes replicate for any reason than that they replicate via black holes because advanced civilizations manufacture black holes because the universes evolved to make them do it. And he said, until then, he had not felt these extra details as extra burdens. Instead, they were corroborative detail, lending verisimilitude to the narrative. Someone presents you with a package of strange ideas, one of which is that universes replicate. Then they present support for the assertion that universes replicate. But this is not support for the package, though it is all told as one story. You have to disentangle the details. You have to hold up every one independently and ask, how do we know this detail? Someone sketches out a picture of humanity's descent into nanotechnological warfare, where China refuses to abide by an international control agreement, followed by an arms race. Wait a minute. How did that all be China? Is it a crystal ball in your pocket, or are you just happy to be a futurist? Where are all these details coming from? Where did that specific detail come from? For it is written, if you can lighten your burden, you must do so. There is no straw that lacks the power to break your back. Here ends chapter 6. Now, in other videos we've touched on this a little bit in the past. Why is it that adding loads of extra detail makes a thing seem more convincing rather than less? Why is it that 10% of 10% of 10% seems bigger than 10%? Well, one thing I'd like to add is something from the previous episode. It was mentioned in the ancestral environment that pretty much everything you encountered, you either encountered yourself or you were told about by the one person who had also encountered it. Now expand that out a little bit into village life. Which is more likely? If a person tells you about a dragon, which seems very unlikely, or they tell you about a dragon and then start to add details. They tell you it was red, they tell you it would breathe fire, and they tell you it squashed this building, and that Jim, the tailor, ran away from it in terror, and all the rest of it. These details, which build up a story, make it seem more real because by recalling all these details, it makes it more likely that the person was actually there, and not simply confabulating a cool story, no matter how likely that actually is. And I suspect this is part of it, at least. Bill is a jazz player may not seem particularly likely, but Bill is an accountant who is also a jazz player seems more likely, even though one is a smaller subset of the other. Why? Well, if someone's telling you a story and they add in all these extra details, it makes it seem more likely, whether it's true or not, that the person actually does know something more about the person or the subject, and thus it's more likely to be true. Even if in actual reality, people are brilliant at lying and just simply making up stories. But it seems more real, and that's half the problem. Something to think about, certainly. Well, that's all for Chapter 6. See you next time for Chapter 7. Bye for now.